Hello, hello. It is still 2022. Oh my gosh, hold on. Hello. This is still 2023. I cannot believe it. I am sitting here right now recording, and we're just getting into the holiday season, thinking that this is going to be airing in 2023. And it's just crazy to me. I cannot believe that 2023 is here. So today we have quite the stories for you. And guess what? We have a special co-host, and it's Paige, our transcriber.
Yes.
Dear VBAC Link family member. So excited to have you with us, Paige. And this story is even close to your heart because this is your family.
Yes,
right?
This is my sister-in-law, Lizzy.
Yes, so exciting. So you guys, I can't even tell you. I'm like sitting here looking at her notes right here, and she has so many stories, and they're all different, like crazy different. And so we're really excited to turn the time over to her, but Paige is going to do the review and then we'll get started.
Yes, I am. So my review comes from an email sent to us just a few days ago, which is so exciting. It's from Molly, and she says, "Hi there, my name is Molly Marshall, and I just wanted to reach out and send a review of the pod. I've been listening for quite some time now, since I had my first baby in August of 2020 via C-section. It was absolutely the opposite experience that I was expecting to have, mixed with a scary pandemic. After that, I began listening to your podcast just to hear other women's stories who had gone through similar experiences. This made me feel a lot less alone. Once we decided to try for a second baby, I began listening to the pod even more frequently, on top of lots of other research and such. Just last week, on Wednesday, I welcomed my second baby boy via successful VBAC. I give so much credit to your podcast and what you're doing, because it was the driving force and motivator for me to push for my VBAC. And I'm so glad I did. It was truly a redemption story, and I'm so thankful for the work you're doing. I told so many people about the podcast, and I hope to be able to help any friends of mine explore VBAC too, if they desire. Please don't stop sharing these stories. It means the absolute world to those of us listening. After my second birth, I just want to scream it from the rooftops. VBAC is totally possible, even if it feels overwhelming and out of reach. Needless to say, I love your podcast, and you've changed my life. Thank you so much, Molly."
Oh, when I saw this review come in, I got teary-eyed. Like, I really got teary-eyed. Like, it meant so much. And I'm so happy for her, and so happy for everyone who's listening. And even if it doesn't end in a VBAC, or even if that decision through listening to the podcast isn't to go for a VBAC, if there's any, even just slight, one little tiny thing that the VBAC Link can bring to you, whether it's empowerment, education, whether it's kind of processing something through learning, whatever it is, like, that just warms my heart. So to hear that review, I love it. So thank you so much, Molly. And as always, we're always accepting more reviews to read on the podcast. And you can really submit it anyway. She's submitted it through an email. You can send it to the podcast on like Apple Podcasts, or you can go to Google, or you can go to Facebook, or just send us a message on Instagram, whatever it may be. We love your reviews. And I seriously, I'm not kidding. I wish I could have had, the Taylor Swift TikTok thing that's popular, where the mom is dancing and then the kid is recording, but it's really recording them. That would be I wish I kind of had that, because I wish I could really portray the emotion that I was feeling reading this review.
It's so sweet.
Oh, it was so amazing. So thank you so much.
You are tuned into the VBAC Link podcast with Megan Heaton, who is a longtime doula and VBAC mom herself, here to help you get inspired for birth after having had a C-section. Along with this podcast, the VBAC Link offers blogs, resources, and a comprehensive VBAC course for both parents preparing for birth and doulas wanting to take their VBAC education to the next level. Be sure to follow Megan and her team on all social media platforms for even more. Although these podcast episodes are VBAC specific, it is encouraged for all expectant moms to listen and educate themselves on how to avoid a C-section from the get-go. The purpose of this podcast is to educate and inform. It is not meant to replace advice from any other qualified medical professional. Here is your host, Megan.
Hello, VBAC listeners. This is Megan here. I just wanted to drop a quick trigger warning in today's episode. It does contain some details and verbiage that may be triggering or alarming to the listening ear. Okay, Lizzy. Hi. Thank you so much for being here with us today. I cannot wait to hear about all of your incredible births. And you guys, when I say all, I want to say she has 10 kids, 10 kiddos. Isn't that amazing? I love it so much. I love being a mom. I don't know if I could do it with 10 kids. Like, it takes a special person, Lizzy. Like, you are incredible. And I cannot wait to hear about all of these births.
Perfect. Well, so I guess I'll just start from the beginning. So I had my first baby in December of 2011. And I was horribly uneducated. I didn't even know what like the birth process looked like or anything really. My husband is the oldest of 9 kids, and his mom is very pro natural birth. She had her last 2 babies at home with only her and her husband there. And so my husband was very pro natural birth, but we were still newly married and trying to figure out how to really talk to each other. And, have communication. And so I was about 10 days overdue with my first baby. And I went into a doctor's appointment and they were like, yeah, like everything looks good, but like, do you want to be induced? Like, usually by now women are begging me to get the baby out of them. And I was content and pretty happy, but I was like, oh, I guess meeting my baby might be kind of a really cool thing. And so I was like, sure, let's do this. I was like, I kind of want it to be like a little less invasive, but I wasn't, like I said, I wasn't super educated. My husband was like, maybe we should try and do like as little as possible. And I was like, okay. So we checked into the hospital the next day and they broke my water, which I remember it's like a legitimate crochet hook. Like they came in and like opened the package and I was like, that's a crochet hook. And they're like, it's a medical instrument. And I was like, no, it's not. That is just a crochet hook from Joann's. But anyway, so they broke my water and then I just chilled for lots of hours and didn't have any labor. Nothing happened. And so then they came in and they were like, we're going to put you on some Pitocin to see if we can get things moving. And so they put me on Pitocin, and then every time I had a contraction, his heart rate started to drop. And so then they got really nervous, understandably, and it'd been lots of hours since they had broken my water and they were worried about infection. And it was just the classic cascade of interventions. And so we ended up doing an emergency C-section. Turns out, well, this is what we assume. I mean, I wasn't actually in the womb to know what was happening, but he had this huge dent on his forehead. Like he wasn't lined up in the birth canal, right? Like his forehead just kept getting caught on my pelvis. But he was 10 pounds, 11 ounces. And he was just this big baby. And then that was his birth. And I had been told that nursing counted as birth control. And so, which is not true. Anyone listening, that is such a lie.
But so many people think that, though, just FYI, they really do. Like, you're not alone out there.
Right. And so 3 months later, I was pregnant again. Because I remember I was like, it had been like 3 months. I turned to my husband. I was like, did I have a period this month? And he was like, I don't know.
I don't know.
And I was like, like, what? And then I took a pregnancy test and I was pregnant. And I was like, oh, well, there we go. But I really that's when I kind of really started getting into VBACs and birthing and like getting educated. And I gained a lot of weight with my first pregnancy, like 40, 50 pounds. And so with my second pregnancy, I followed the gestational diabetes diet because when I tested on it, I wasn't officially gestational diabetic, but I was like right on the border, you know? And so I was like, maybe there's like a margin of error and I probably am. And so I followed the diet and I maybe moderately exercised, probably not, mostly just dieted. And then I went into labor on my, oh no, that's right. Sorry. I have to remember. There's a lot of stories.
There's so many. Yeah.
I also did hypno babies like last minute. Cause I was like, wait a minute, I want to do this VBAC, but I had like no education really. And so I started listening to Hypno Babies and going through that whole program. And then one day I decided to walk home from church because I was so sick and tired of having this baby in me. And I was, I think, a few days overdue. For some reason, we had expected him to come early, but he just wasn't. And so I power walked as fast as I possibly could for like half a mile, 3/4 of a mile, until I was like so sore I almost couldn't walk anymore. And I got home and I contracted a little bit, and then it all petered out, and I went to bed, and I woke up the next morning and just was contracting throughout the day, just gradually building. It was like the perfect labor story kind of. And then that night I was like, okay, it's time to go to the hospital. And we actually called my mother-in-law to come down because we wanted her to come help us labor because she was so pro-birth and we just wanted an extra person in our court. And my husband was so supportive, and we were laboring, and it just was going. And every time I was like, this is awful. Like, give me an epidural. My husband was like, no, like, it's okay. We can do this. Like, just keep breathing, one more contraction, and then, just face the next contraction. And we really worked through it together. And it was a really beautiful experience. My mother-in-law was really awesome. My husband was sitting on a rolling stool while I contracted. And every time I contracted, I basically just headbutted him on that rolling stool. And so he was trying really hard to give me counter pressure, but that's really hard on a rolling stool. So my mother-in-law just stood behind him and braced him the whole time. She didn't like say anything. She just was there making sure the process could continue. And it was so wonderful for my husband and I to do this really hard thing together. And it was so bonding and beautiful for us that's part of what we love most about vaginal birthing is just the relationship builder it is to be able to go through something so hard and painful together and do that. And then he came out and it was a VBAC and he was 8 pounds, 2 ounces. And so his was just kind of like the perfect, like the classic, what you read about in a textbook, how a baby's born, vaginally.
Yeah.
And so that was awesome. And we were so excited about that. And we had done it and there was all this joy and it was so happy. And I healed faster and I felt better.
The Venture X card from Capital One gives you premium travel benefits, perfect for seeing Taylor Swift The Eras Tour, presented by Capital One. Ooh, I do love her. Earn 5 times miles on flights and 10 times miles on hotels through Capital One Travel.
Enjoy your stay in Suite 13.
Whoa, 13? That's Taylor's lucky number. The Venture X card from Capital One. What's in your wallet?
Terms apply. See CapitalOne.com for details.
And then I had a miscarriage pretty early on, I think like 8 weeks, 6-8 weeks. And then right after the miscarriage, I got pregnant and I did not watch my diet. I did not exercise, gained a lot of weight. And finally I was 2 weeks overdue. Actually, I was like a week overdue and they were like, hey, maybe we should think about doing something. And I was like, no. I was seeing midwives and I was like, I need to give it the whole 2 weeks. I have to know that if I wouldn't have waited a little bit longer, if it wouldn't have just happened. And so I really pushed him all the way to the 2 weeks. And then I just never went into labor. Actually, that's not true. A few days before I had hard labor for like 3 hours, 4 hours, and then stopped and nothing else. And except for those couple hours, nothing had happened. I felt nothing. And so finally I went in. And we did a planned C-section and she was 10 pounds, 14 ounces. And I think my body was just like, friend, I'm not sure I can do this. Like, this is a really big baby. So there was that. And then on my 4th baby, I learned my lesson and I went back to my diet, my exercising, and I went into labor on my own and went to the hospital. And I'm a very vocal laborer. I yell and I moan and I say mean things about the baby when I'm in transition. And my midwife was getting really nervous. She was like, because she had never seen me labor. She had been there for like my C-section baby, but she hadn't ever seen me in active labor. And she kept turning to my husband and saying, is this normal? Like, is she having a uterine rupture? Like, how do I know like what this pain level is? And my husband was like, no, like she's okay. This is just how she does it. Like, but she was super nervous and she kept pushing me to try different positions. And it wasn't my favorite birth because she ended up having me lie on my side with one knee pulled up high to deliver the baby. And I just didn't love that position. It wasn't terribly comfortable, but the baby came out and we had a VBAC and everything was happy. And so that was awesome. And then my next pregnancy was a set of twins. And I had a subchorionic hemorrhage and I bled a lot. Like I would wake up regularly in the morning with blood stains the size of cereal boxes on my bed.
Gosh.
And I would call my provider and be like, hey, I'm bleeding. And they're like, well, as long as you don't have any cramping, you're fine. Bleeding's okay. Cramping's bad. So when the two of them happen together, like call us. But I just was bleeding so much and it was so weird. And I remember just feeling like these babies were going to come early. I just kind of had this feeling like I remember counting down to viability because I was like, oh, good. At least now I know they can make it if I deliver. And about a few days before they were born, I started passing really big clots. And then a few days later, and I had gone into labor. And so I went into the hospital. And by the time I got checked in and laid down and all the cords hooked up, they were like, you're not in labor anymore. Or they're like, and it was not very, and I felt like an idiot because I was like, I've already had 4 kids. I know what labor is, but they're like, well, make sure that you've labored for at least an hour with strong contractions before you come back in, and I felt very patronized and patted on the head and sent back to bed. And I was like, and I just felt humiliated. And so I went home and I was like, that's it. I'm not going back unless it happens for 2 hours because I'm not doing that again. Getting sent home from the hospital is the worst thing ever. It's happened to me a couple times and I just hate it. So then a few days later, I started going into labor again. I was like, okay. So I drank lots of water. I laid down on my left side. I took a shower. And my husband was trying to get our kids in bed because we had 4 other kids. And they must have known something was up because they were being awful and super rowdy. And so finally we just locked them in their rooms. And my husband came to check on me and I was still laboring. And I was like, you know what? It's been like 2 hours. I think we should go. And it was actually funny. I remember going to him after about an hour of labor and be like, I just don't like this baby anymore. This hurts so bad. I don't want to do this anymore. And he chuckled and said, it sounds like you're in transition. And we both laughed. And then I went back to my room and kept laboring because in my mind, there was no way you could have a baby in 2 hours. Like it just wasn't possible. And so I went back to my room and he finished up with the kids. And then I was like, okay, it's time to go to the hospital. So we called our babysitters, which were these 3 little girls that lived across the street, these sisters that were 9, 8, and 7. And so they came over and they were sitting in the front room. And I was like, okay, I need to go to the bathroom. I think I am having some gas cramps. I'm going to see if I can work something out. And my husband knew because the same thing had happened to his mom, where she had felt like she needed to go to the bathroom and had a baby. And he was like, wait, I know what this means. And so he followed me. And all of a sudden I was like, this is not right. And like, I started pushing and I was like, oh my goodness, something's coming out of me. And I was like, honey, what is happening? And so I stood up and the baby fell out and my husband just caught him right before he hit the water.
Oh my gosh.
But I was 23 weeks and 6 days. And so he was 1.5 pounds. His entire body fit in my husband's hand. His head was the size of a clementine. Like he was just so little. And I remember my husband laid me down. Way too early. And I remember he laid me down in the shower and put the baby on my lap. And we just also were like, okay, what do we do now? Like, and he was moving and it looked like he was grunting, but we couldn't really tell if he was breathing or not. So we called 911. But the amazing thing is as we were figuring out what to do, we just felt so peaceful. Like we're very religious, and we just felt like God was like, it's okay. It's okay. Now you should call an ambulance.
Wow. That is I'd be like,
I know. Well, and that's what I expected, but we were both just like, we took a deep breath and then we're like, okay, now let's call 911. We can do this. So we call them, and the paramedics get here, and we've totally forgotten about our babysitters. So these paramedics just come in through the front door. These little girls are like, what's going on? And they come back to our bedroom, and it seemed like it took them forever for me to get me on a stretcher and out to the ambulance. And I think they were waiting to see if I was going to deliver my other baby, because, twins usually come pretty fast in succession. I remember laying there being like, why aren't you taking me? Like, why are we just sitting here? My baby is like, maybe not breathing. Like, can we get a move on here? Wow. And so they finally took me out. But as soon as I got my first twin A out, my body just stopped. I don't know, like it just didn't need to contract anymore. It was like, it just turned off. And so they got me in the ambulance. There was a hospital just like a couple blocks from our house, but it was a very small hospital. It was like, I think they had a NICU, but it was for like 37-week babies who need help with breathing. It was not well equipped for this situation. And so they took me into the OR. They cut the cord and whisked twin A off and tried to get him breathing. And it ended up taking them about an hour to get him oxygen because they didn't have any neonatologists there. They just had pediatricians. And so he was on the phone with a neonatologist trying to figure out how to intubate this 1.5 pound baby.
Holy cow. So baby was breathing, but not well, not enough.
Is my
And so they
memory.
had to like just really help this baby's undeveloped lungs.
Yeah.
To breathe.
He was not going to survive on his own. Yeah. He was not going to make it without intubation. So, but then I never delivered the placenta. So they just sanitized the part of the cord that was hanging out and shoved it back in because they didn't want to, they wanted to keep the other baby in as long as possible. And so they didn't want to induce labor to get the placenta out. They were like, you know what, we're just going to put this back in and see what happens, because everyone figured that probably in 24 hours I was having my other baby. And they gave me all the shots, the magnesium, the steroids, the everything. And magnesium is awful. It makes my whole body felt like I was on fire, like from the inside out burning. Yeah. And it was, I don't like magnesium, but I understand its purpose.
Yeah, it has a purpose, but it definitely makes you feel crummy.
Yeah. So then they transferred me to a different hospital, and they just kind of watched me. And they were like, okay. And finally, like, it'd been like 24 hours and I hadn't had the baby. And they're like, well, I guess we're just going to check you into, I think it was labor and delivery. I don't know, somewhere. And they're like, you're just going to chill here until you have a baby. And I was like, okay. And so 11 days. So was
there time? Just curious. So they didn't transfer you, right? Like
they did after. So
sorry, for baby number 2, they transferred you to a better hospital.
Yes. Okay. Once they had me stabilized and realized I wasn't having another baby in the time it took to get to the hospital, they transferred me.
Let's get you to a place that can handle a 23-week birth. Yeah. Yeah.
And then as soon as they had Caden, twin A, stabilized and had him intubated, they transferred him too by life flight because they couldn't help him there.
Gotcha.
So then I was in the hospital for 11 days before I delivered my second twin. And I just...
With 4 kids at home.
Yeah. And my husband was working and trying to play mom to 4 kids. And he definitely had the hard job. I mean, I was sitting in that hospital for 11 days, like making homemade thank you cards and like making jewelry. And I was like, this is amazing. This is like a momcation. This is awesome. And I'd go sit and, look at my baby. And then, I mean, it was a little scary, but it honestly was like really relaxing. And I felt so bad for my husband because he was doing everything and was holding it together really well, considering everything he had to do.
And it was over Thanksgiving. So we all came and visited you.
That's right. It was Thanksgiving.
And I remember visiting Caden, and his body was just so translucent.
Yeah.
So tiny. But yeah, that waiting place.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so then 11 days later, I just went into labor on my own. Well, and the other thing they kept trying to decide was, which is better? The baby does better in the womb, but if he gets an infection, that's worse. So they kept balancing the, do we induce you or let it go? And so they monitored me really close for infection, but I didn't show any signs. And then 11 days later, I just went into labor on my own. And I remember my doctor, Dr. Dadling. I've been trying to think of her name for the last 3 days. I finally remembered it. She was super awesome. And we loved her. And she came in, she's like, okay, I really think we should give you an epidural. And I was like, this baby's going to be itty bitty. It's just going to literally fall out of me. That's not going to be painful. She goes, yes, but she said, I'm really worried the placentas aren't going to deliver well. And that I'm going to have to go in and scrape them out of you. And that will be very painful. I really suggest you get the epidural. And so I did, because the idea of people scraping things out of me was sufficient to push me to an epidural. And so they gave me the epidural, and my husband got there, and twin B was born, and they immediately whisked him off and got him to oxygen, and he was set and stable within a matter of minutes. And I delivered my placentas just fine. And it was a great delivery. And that was that. And so that was awesome. And we were excited that both babies were here. But then 4 days later, twin B got an infection and died. And so
what, just a random infection or?
Yeah. So my understanding, there was a lot of medical terms that I don't understand, but they automatically put babies that young on antibiotics as soon as they're born, because they know that infection risks are high. And he'd been on them for about 3 days and wasn't showing any signs of anything. And it's not good to be on medications you don't need. And so they took him off the medication. And then within about 12 hours, he was looking really gross. Yeah. He wasn't looking good. And then 12 hours later, he was gone. He was so little. He was 2 pounds.
Wow.
And, it was just, I'm not angry at anyone. I don't feel like it was anyone's fault. I feel like this was God's plan. I mean, the fact that Caden was born at home, twin A, and didn't have any oxygen for an hour and didn't have any of the drugs and is still alive today. And his twin brother, who was born in a hospital with everything he needed and then died. It just seems so clear to me that God has a plan and that this is what was supposed to happen. And so it did. And you can try and control things and do the best you can. And that's great. And God wants you to do that. But in the end, what needs to happen happens.
Yeah.
And so I came away with a lot of peace and not very much anger. And I was really fortunate in that. I mean, it was so painful. It was so unbelievably painful. And it was really interesting because we learned that my husband and I grieve in different ways. When my husband grieves, he wants to be around family and feel supported and be around people. And I just want to hide and be alone. I don't want to talk to anyone. I don't want anyone to tell me it's going to be okay. I just want people to say, you're right. This sucks. This is so painful. I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
And, and so that was kind of hard moving through that, but we figured it out and we're doing a lot better now. And then we got pregnant again. And I was so nervous. I was so nervous that something was going to go wrong and something was going to break or the baby was going to die. I didn't know what was going to happen. And it was very stressful for me. And the pregnancy went really well. It was a very smooth pregnancy, but I still had all these lingering fears in me that it was, something horrible was going to go wrong.
Yeah.
And I went into labor and we checked into the hospital, and the room they put us in to be evaluated was 2 doors down from the room that we said goodbye to our little boy in. And it totally shut off all of my labor. We tried walking the halls to get things working, but we kept running into people we knew from the NICU. And, his respiratory therapists. And it brought back all the memories and all the fears. And we just couldn't do it. Or, my labor totally shut off. So they sent us home. And I remember as we drove home, I said, I can't do it. I can't go back to that hospital. There's too many hard memories there.
Yeah.
And my husband felt the same way. And he said, what if we do a home birth? And I was like, are you nuts? Like, I'm like 39 weeks pregnant, 40 weeks pregnant. Like, this baby is coming. We can't do a home birth. And he was like, yeah, we can. Let's do it. We'll call my mom. She's delivered babies. Like, we can totally do it. And so we were like, okay, I guess we're going to do a home birth because we know we can't deliver at the hospital. So I guess this is the only other option. And so we called his mom. We were like, hey, we need you to come help us deliver this baby. And she was like, I'm sorry, what? But she was wonderful. I know. And she was like, okay, well, when do you want me to come down? And we were like, now. Like, if you could get in the car now, that would be great. She was like, oh my okay. Because, we had just been in the hospital for labor. So we assumed it was imminent. And so we were like, no, really, I think you should head down here because at any moment I could go into labor again. Yeah. And so she came down and then it was a whole week. And she just hung out at our house. And I remember finally one day I was like, I need you to like leave my house for the day. Like, I can't, seeing you here reminds me I haven't had my baby yet. Like, I need to stop ultra focusing on this. And I need you to you have a daughter that lives here, go visit her, like go away for the day and then come back. It's not that I'm angry at you. It's all I'm thinking about. And then I finally just went into labor on my own. And it was a really hard labor. I was in transition for like 2 hours. It was much harder and much more difficult than my previous labors had been. But then she came and it's actually really funny because it was kind of early in the morning, like 6 or 7. And she came out. And like I said, I'm a really vocal laborer. So there was lots of yelling and lots of screaming. And my kids were awake. They were like watching a movie in a different room while we're trying to, have this baby. And so she comes out and like 15 seconds later, my son walks in the door. He's, gosh, I don't know, probably 3 or 4. I think 4 is about right. And he walks in the door and he goes, oh, is that the baby? I mean, there's blood, there's fluid. I mean, we're trying to make sure this baby's breathing. Like, she has just come out. And we're like, yep, it is. Can you go away, please? Like, give us a few minutes. And he's like, okay. And so he leaves. And 30 seconds later, he comes back with all of our kids. And it's like, look, Mom's had the baby. And we're like, yep, we did. Can you please give us just a few more minutes?
Oh, my
And so it was just, but it was so beautiful and so wonderful. And I laid down in my own bed and it felt so healing after our traumatic twin birth and not being able to face a hospital and everything associated with that, to be able to have this successful home birth where we were all together and my kids climbed in bed with me. It just was wonderful and beautiful and everything that we needed. And then we got pregnant again.
I love it. And then another baby.
Right? And all of my kids,
after a really healing birth, though, that had to have been just so special.
It was so special. And all my kids are about 12 to 18 months apart. Like, I have 10 kids and my oldest turns 11 next month. So they're all really, really close, which is something else that was really interesting is, a lot of times you hear with the VBACs and with getting pregnant after C-sections, you need to wait 9 months. You need to wait a year. You need to wait 18 months before you even get pregnant or whatever. And we just did what we wanted. I mean, you definitely should consult medical professionals with your specific instances, but we felt really good every time we got pregnant. Like, yep, we're ready to get pregnant. Let's do this again. Like, we feel good about this. And so we went ahead and did it, even though I don't think any doctor in the world would advocate doing what we've done. But we got pregnant again, and my water broke the very first night of our family reunion. He was like a week early or so. And everyone was coming up for the weekend to our house for a family reunion. And that night my water broke. And I was like, oh my goodness, everyone is at our house. And we are planning to do another home birth. And so I kind of told all the moms as they were putting the kids down to bed, I was like, I don't think you want your kids upstairs. Like, I'm probably going to be in labor all night screaming. So find someplace farther away so your children will sleep through the night. And so we did. And everyone was kind of like, why aren't you going to the hospital? Like, your water has broken. What are you doing here? Why are you having a home birth? But we were good with it. We were just like, you know what? This is what we're doing. And I went to bed that night trying to sleep, knowing what was coming, and then woke up the next morning. And I was like, wait a minute. I was supposed to have a baby. What happened? And so I'm just kind of hanging out, waiting for labor to happen. And we hiked a small mountain to have like a bridal shower for my sister-in-law. All the while I'm like, okay, like maybe this will get it started, maybe not. And finally it had been like 18 hours or something. And like nothing, not even really any contractions. And I was like, I think maybe we need to call someone now. Like, this infections are real, as we know. So let's get on the phone with someone. And they were like, your water broke when? And we were like 18 hours ago. And they're like, will you please come into the hospital now? And I was like, yeah, I'll come in. And so we checked in, and actually the doctor I met there was not my normal doctor. My normal doctor was on vacation and getting back like the next day. So we had the guy that was just on call, and he was actually really supportive. He was like, you know what? Let's try maybe giving you like a little Pitocin, like just a little something to maybe get things going and see what happens. He was totally on board with like, let's go for a vaginal birth. But I was feeling a lot of fear. Like, something about having a vaginal delivery did not feel right to me. I was really scared.
Yeah.
And I was really scared of the pain, to be honest. Part of me was like, I don't want to. Like, that's so owie. I don't want to do that. If I just do a C-section, they'll drug me up and I'll have a baby, which I knew wasn't true in my brain, but I wasn't really thinking clearly, because I knew that the delivery wouldn't be painful, but the recovery would be so much worse. But at that moment, I was like, I just really don't feel good about this. I was really torn. And my husband was like, you want to pick a C-section? And I was like, I think so. Like, something doesn't feel right about this. And so I finally did. I said, can I just choose to have a C-section? And they were like, yeah, you can do that if you want to. Like, we'll go prep the OR. And they started the C-section, and I could feel everything. It was awful. I kept telling, I was like, you guys, like, this really hurts. I can feel you cutting me. And they were like, oh, it's okay. Like, the pain meds are kicking in. And like the anesthesiologist kept like pushing more drugs. And, you know, he didn't understand why I wasn't feeling like, why I was feeling this, why the pain meds weren't working. And it turned out because I was feeling so much pain, I had kinked my wrists. I was flexing my wrists because I was in so much pain, which had kinked my IV. So none of the drugs were getting to me. So when they finally realized that, they're like, you need to relax your hands. And I did. And all the drugs hit me at once. I remember watching myself floating away from my body while Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds played in the background. Like, I've never been stoned before, but I'm pretty sure like this is exactly how it feels. But yeah, I remember like, whoa, I was like, bye, Lizzy. Like, as I floated away from my body, and it was like all psychedelic, and it was really intense. And I remember them asking me, and then the rest of the C-section's pretty much a blur. And they got the baby out, and I remember them saying, do you want to hold your baby? And I was like, nope. I don't even know where my arms are. So please don't put that baby on me, because it's just going to fall off of me. And I was so out of it. And so it was just all weird. And it took me a long time to come back to, even afterwards. I didn't hold my baby, I don't think, for a couple hours, because I just didn't feel enough in control of my body that I could do it safely. But he came and that was happy. And so that was his birth. And then we got pregnant again with twins. And I was so excited. I had prayed for so long. After Levi, our twin, died, I prayed for so long that we would get another chance at twins. I'd always wanted twins. And I thought that was so cool. And I just said, please, please, please give us another chance, except for it's got to be a different outcome. Like, I can't do this like dying baby again. Like, please just send us twins and make them healthy and happy. And it's going to be great. And so we got pregnant with twins and I was so excited, except I was bleeding again. And it was just like the first time. And I was so scared. There were huge blood stains, but the bleeding seemed to heal itself a lot faster. It totally went away. And so I was like, oh, great. Like, this looks awesome. It looks like we're in a good spot. And the rest of the pregnancy went really well. And it got time to deliver. Now, I currently live in a very rural town where they have a hospital, but it's not, they were like, we don't have enough blood like on site that if you hemorrhaged, we could save you. We really think you should deliver somewhere else. Like, we like you. We love taking care of you. We'd really love to deliver your babies. You should go someplace else for your safety, just because you're a high hemorrhage risk with the amount of kids you've had, how quickly you're having twins, they're high risk because you've been having bleeding. Please go someplace else. And so we did. We went to a hospital 2 hours away and we scheduled it. And we showed up and got all ready and went in for the C-section, and everything was I actually asked them, I was like, can I record my C-section on my phone? Like, is there an extra nurse that can take a video of my C-section? Because I've always wanted to see myself birth a baby, but I always forget to tell people that I want to do that. And so like, we're in the middle of birthing and my husband's like, oh, do you want a beer? And I'm like, just get this thing out of me. You know, I'm not in the mood to like deal with it at that point. And so I've never seen, I don't know, I've never even watched like birth videos of other people having babies because I just wanted to watch me. Like, I've wanted to, like, the first time I see it, I want it to be me. And so I asked him, I was like, can some nurse like record this? And he was like, yeah, sure. So I totally have a video of my C-section on my phone, which is a little disarming to watch, actually.
Oh, I wish I had mine.
But it's my kids have watched it and cool. They think it's very cool. Mm-hmm. And I remember as they were doing the C-section, I got so nauseous. I really thought I was going to throw up everywhere. And I don't know what caused that. But the babies came out and everything was beautiful. And I had these two beautiful girls that looked totally different and were like 1.5 pounds different in size. And I was in the recovery room, and all of a sudden I noticed that all the nurses are starting to get really agitated. And my husband's there kind of with me too. And they're like, we're going to take the babies away, to the recovery place. We need to help mom. Are you okay with that? And my husband's like, yeah, take the babies away. I'm going to stay here with mom. And they're like, okay, good. And I started hemorrhaging really bad. And I wasn't sure really at first what was going on, but I could just tell something was wrong. Everyone was starting to panic, and the doctor came back. And so they finally told me, they're like, you're hemorrhaging. We're trying to get it to stop. We're going to try some stuff. And I was like, okay. And then they proceeded to punch down on my just recently cut open belly. And that was the most excruciating pain I have ever felt. Like, oh my goodness, it was awful. They just kept pushing and pushing, trying to get my uterus to start clamping down again. And it just wasn't happening. And so they told me, they're like, okay, we've previously discussed that you don't know if you're done having babies or not. So we don't want to do a hysterectomy if we don't have to. We have one more thing we can try, but if not, we're going to have to do that. Like, we've got to stop this bleeding. And so we're like, okay, we'll do what you can. We understand that emergencies happen. And so they took me in and did this crazy, I was so out of it. I was in so much pain. And I just said, whatever you do, like, if you have to take my uterus, will you please just put me under? I'm so done. I can't feel this anymore. I need to be put out. And they're like, And I remember the doctor being like, yes, I promise I will put you under if I have to put you in surgery again. And it's called a uterine artery embolism. And they took like a picture of my uterus and all the arteries from above. And they shot contrast fluid into all the arteries. And this doctor had to take a probe, a really long cord, and he went in my femoral artery in my leg. It had to go up like around my heart and back down into my uterus. I don't know how he did. Like, I don't know how medicine does these things, but it was so crazy. And they take a still picture of where all my arteries were. And then he would guide the probe like by feel through my body. And they take another picture and see what it looked like. And he'd push it through until he got to the artery and filled it with the medical equivalent of minimal expanding foam. And just totally clogged up that whole artery so that it couldn't bleed
Very
anymore.
fascinating.
Right? I know. And it was a total miracle. Our doctor told us afterward, it took him like, I think 20 minutes to do it. And he said, I've never seen him do it faster than 45. Like, this was unbelievably fast and wildly successful. And it stopped the bleeding and I was able to keep my uterus. But it was kind of it was a hard recovery after having the C-section and then getting pounded on after that. And then all the procedures afterwards. It was a really rough recovery. And I was older. I'd had lots of kids, it just kind of all compounded. And that was the recovery. But the twin girls were here and they were beautiful and so happy. And I was able to tandem nurse, which is something I had hoped I'd be able to do. And now I have these 10 beautiful children that are just adorable.
Oh my gosh. I love it. Yeah. Wow. What a journey you have been through. Like, holy smokes. I am sorry about your loss. That is hard, and definitely felt the emotion in your story after. But thank you so much for sharing all of these beautiful stories and this journey that you have been on. It has definitely been quite the journey, and so many unique things that, you mentioned it yourself, like talking about like waiting until you're 18 months after to get pregnant or to give birth and things like that, and with between your C-section and your first VBAC, you said 3 months.
Yeah.
3 months. So we know it's possible out there. And I think the biggest thing is, there are all these studies. And I think that everyone needs to read the studies, educate themselves, and then make the decision that's best for them. But it's really just that. Make the decision that's best for you. And for you, your kids are closer, and sounds like you have such a happy crew for sure.
Yes.
But are there any tips that you would give to our listeners, especially with your going through such high and low emotion from each birth, right? Do you have any tips that you would give our listeners?
I think one I would say is just remember that each birth is its own birth, and that you need to be able to let it unfold the way it needs to without worrying about what's happened previously. You need to, every birth, it can be so different that, I felt a lot of fear after we lost our boy that it was going to happen every single time after. And once I realized that, this is a new baby, this is a new experience, I just need to have faith it's going to work out. I think that helped a lot. And just say, you know what? Yes, that happened. I hated that. It was awful. I don't want to ever do it again. I'm going to try heading forward, believing this is going to be different. And not to the point where you ignore, bad signs or bad feelings, but just where you say, you know what? I'm going to let this baby be its own and not be controlled by the fear of my previous pregnancies. That was a big help for me, was to let each baby be their own.
Oh, I love that, because especially with VBAC, we have this past, and sometimes they're traumatic, sometimes they're not. So, we all deal with and have experienced different cesareans, and and things, but we still have this past birth. And for me, I mean, even with my third, I was triggered because I had similarities of the way the labor started. And I had to truly be like, this is a different baby. This is a different birth. This is years later. I have to try and stay present in this space and not flash back to, 3 years ago or 2 years ago. And it's really hard to do. Really hard to do. But
very hard.
Yeah. But I love that you said that, like each baby and, each birth, it's individual. So we have to try and remember that.
And I think the other thing I tell myself a lot is a healthy baby is most important. That the end goal is a living baby at the end. Like, as long as I get a baby at the end that's healthy, it's going to be okay. The experience might not have been what I wanted, but the thing I really cared about was the baby. That was the end goal. The end goal was getting the precious, perfect, beautiful baby. And every time I got that. And so every time was a win because that was my expectation. Now I had other expectations too, but would I rather have gotten the perfect VBAC to have my baby die? No. My goal was to have the baby. Mm-hmm. And so you try as hard as you can, do as you can. And if it doesn't go the way you want it, you still get this beautiful baby. And that's what's really the happiest about this is you got the baby.
I think what I look up to the most about Lizzy and her stories is that no, it's not conventional. I don't think there's anybody in the world who has had similar stories quite like Lizzy's with kids that close together. I mean, typically in families that have a lot of kids, it's kind of like all bad. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah,
right?
I think it's mostly vaginal births.
I think Lizzy's stories are very unique because there's like C-sections sprinkled in there and then a VBAC. And we can all relate to that feeling deep within us of being drawn to VBAC. And it's like, I know this is a little more risky. I know this isn't maybe what a doctor would recommend initially. I mean, hopefully your practice is supportive, but that calling is in your heart and you go for it because your intuition's telling you your body can do it. And that's what Lizzy has refined. She's refined her intuition to be able to listen to that, follow it, and recognize that there's this calling to have these babies and bring them to the world in lots of different ways, but also to move forward, not in fear, but how she feels is appropriate. It's probably not what's going to work for you or for me. I'm not going to have 10 kids, but I can still look up to Lizzy, and I've taken so much inspiration from her as I prepared for each of my births because she understands and has such a heart for birth and for unconventional ways of birthing in the way that's right for you.
I love that. Yes. Yeah.
And I mean, I've now had 4 C-sections, and I knew after my 3rd C-section that I couldn't that no provider would let me vaginally birth again. Even after 2, most of them say no, but because I had accidentally had those twins vaginally, it kind of opened that door back up for me. But I knew once I had another C-section, I was done for. I'd never vaginally birth again. And there's part of me that still really mourns that. As I think about having more kids, I'm like, maybe I should just go off the reservation and do like another home birth.
Because I've had 3 now. Lizzy's had 4. And we're like, we can do it.
Right? Like, let's just be each other's midwives and deliver our babies at home in secret.
So TBD, what's the future? We don't know.
Right? Who knows? And so part of me does mourn that like, I'm not going to get that experience again because I think I know that it's not good for my body, that with the history I've had, that it's probably not medically very smart for me to try and do that. But that's okay, because I've been through a lot and I got the baby, and that's what matters. Is I got the baby.
Yeah. Oh, well, thank you so much for sharing all of your stories today, being here with us, taking the time out of your day. I know time is so precious, and I just feel that in so many ways that you're going to touch someone out there listening, just like Molly said in the beginning. It's just this podcast, every story is going to connect with someone differently. And with all your stories, I guarantee there's someone out there that's going to connect or have maybe had a similar situation or was told something similar or something, so it's going to be amazing. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me on. I love talking babies.
So do we, obviously.
Interested in sharing your VBAC story on the podcast? Submit your story at thevbaclink.com/share. For information on all things VBAC, including online and in-person VBAC classes, the VBAC blog, and Julie and Megan's bios, head over to thevbaclink.com. Congratulations on starting your journey of learning and discovery with the VBAC Link.
The Venture X card from Capital One gives you premium travel benefits, perfect for seeing Taylor Swift The Eras Tour. Presented by Capital One. Ooh, I do love her. Earn 5 times miles on flights and 10 times miles on hotels through Capital One Travel.
Enjoy your stay in Suite 13.
Whoa, 13? That's Taylor's lucky number. The Venture X card from Capital One. What's in your wallet?
Terms apply. See CapitalOne.com for details.